Hello, listeners. We are coming to you from the top floor of the tallest building in Fort Collins, Colorado, aka the headquarters of Synergy Capital of Colorado. Today, we have the pleasure of connecting with Ben Mendenhall. Ben is a respected professional in Colorado government finance with a career built across public finance advisory, investment management, and the day to day realities of serving Colorado public entities. In January of 2024, Ben launched Centennial Government Advisors, which operates the Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, or CSLIP. CSLIP was built to serve Colorado public entities and bring a new option to market that for years has only had a few investment pool options. Synergy Capital and Centennial both serve Colorado municipalities and special district communities. Today's conversation is about getting to know Ben and the full reserve picture: liquidity, governance, safety, and how Colorado public entities can make more intentional decisions with taxpayer dollars. Ben, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. That was quite the introduction there. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you've seen how this industry operates from every single angle. We're very excited to hear about your journey, both personal and professional. Before we get into what you're building, help us understand who you are. Where did you grow up? And did that environment teach your work ethic, money management skills, or taking the risks that you've taken?
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah. So, Ben Mendenhall, Managing Director, Centennial Government Advisors, and I'm actually a Colorado native and grew up in South Denver in a little area called Wash Park before it was fancy, if you will, back when the houses were small and the yards were big. And grew up with two parents that were really focused on relationships with not only their customers, but their specific industry. So I kind of had being best in class born into me, if you will. And went to Denver South High School. Was an avid baseball player and played a few other sports while I was there. And a lot of family from the East Coast. So I went out to the East Coast to go to school at the University of Rhode Island. Got out of there in 4 years, double majored in management and finance. I was very fortunate to survive a top 10 business school at the time and went to Europe for 8 weeks to really figure out what the next chapter of my life looked like. Whether I was going to stay on the East Coast and go on to Wall Street or go to Chicago for the options exchange. I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in money management, especially with a lot of the courses that I took while I was at URI. So in that reflection period, I decided that the mountains are too ingrained in who I am. And with fishing and big game hunting and some of these extracurricular activities that I really like to focus on and grew up doing, it was time to move home. So I started my career in 2006, in January 2006. This is my 20th year, which is hard to believe in many ways. Kind of reminds me of that Bob Seger song, 20 years, where'd they go? And I started as an institutional bond broker at Morgan Stanley in Denver and really enjoyed transacting fixed income. And in 2007, I got a phone call that kind of changed the whole course of my career. And that was from Arapahoe County. And I started trading bonds for Arapahoe County, more of a buy and hold strategy, but offering them agencies, treasuries, everything allowable under state statute. And that kind of blossomed my career into an opportunity to work with the city of Loveland when I was 22 years old. And at that point, I knew that I couldn't focus on individual wealth management and had to focus exclusively on local governments. So that really kind of catapulted my career. I worked with a lot of those entities for about 3 years before the financial crisis, and I figured it might be time to go out on my own and explore working with other smaller entities that weren't necessarily tied to massive institutions like that, and got the attention of some of the nationwide and premier nationwide at the time investment advisory firms that had local government investment pools and separately managed accounts for local governments here in Colorado. And in 2012, I moved over to public financial management as a senior analyst and helped them with the Colorado Statewide Investment Pool, or CSIP, and helped cultivate some of the separately managed account relationships and was there for just over 2 years. And then was recruited by Public Trust Advisors to oversee Colo Trust for nearly 10 years. And after 8 years of being there, it was a great opportunity. It was time to explore other options that may be more under my control. So that kind of gives you the story of where I'm from, who I am, and my professional background.
Not a lot of experience is what.
Just a
No,
little bit.
It sounds like you've had a great wide range, which probably gives you that really solid base foundation. Did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, when you were younger or in college, or did that just kind of that path naturally come to you?
That's a great question. Both my parents were entrepreneurs at several points throughout their career. They actually owned a business together. And I guess having that in my DNA, if you will, I always knew that that was something of interest. But I think, much like other young professionals coming out of college, it's very difficult to step into entrepreneurship unless you have a pretty significant head start. And, both my parents did the best they could to provide me with a great life growing up, but we didn't really come from extraordinary amounts of money to have the capital as well as really that nice foundation to start a business. So working for others was really the focus for the front nine of my career. But after seeing a lot of changes in our industry and a lot of changes with how our industry is owned and operated, I figured it was time that I hang a shingle, as they say, and really go out and focus on some of the things that I've learned over my career that worked and improve upon those and try to avoid the ones that don't and really, serve local governments in a way that I feel is best. So that's what really kind of forced me to rip off the band-aid, if you will.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point because when you have parents or someone extremely close that's an entrepreneur, you see all sides of what that means. It's not just, seeing that company doing extremely well and not seeing, the blood, sweat, and tears, the time around the clock that it takes. Also, learning about you that, you didn't grow up with puddles of money. That sparks your competitive nature, along with the baseball, but things are clicking into place just hearing a little bit more about your background. What's been the most surprising thing about starting your business in this specific industry?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many surprises. I think being an entrepreneur, you have surprises every day, all day. But one of the things I would say that really surprised me is, working in this industry as long as I have. When we got going, I figured that I would have a lot more long-standing relationships that would be very motivated to support us as we were getting going. And, that just turns out sometimes not to be the case. So I'd say that's kind of surprise number one. But surprise number two that's probably stuck out to me the most is the amount of extra bandwidth you need every single day. And I always worked hard. I always focused on having a very regimented day so that I was able to get everything done. But, being an entrepreneur, you really have to adapt on the fly. And now I know why it would take some people some amount of time to get back to me at senior management levels because you have so many things you have to juggle. So that was something that surprised me and I really had to adapt to was being able to be flexible on myself with my schedule and know if I didn't get something done in a certain day, it would be tomorrow.
Ben, as a fellow business owner, Tracy and I, we understand that a lot. One thing we also understand too is the ability to shift on the fly. And there's not a bureaucracy that you have to deal with, a national bureaucracy or a business bureaucracy that you have to deal with to make those adjustments that you have to do. Talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to adjust. It's not even just a negative adjustment; it's all positive. But sometimes you have to shift gears and be able to make shifts much quicker.
The best way I can probably answer that question is in the first few months when we were putting the Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool or CSLIP together and working with our very small board at the time, there was decisions that needed to be made every single day. And working with our investment advisor team over at State Street and our fund administrator and our custodial bank, we would have weekly meetings where I'm looking around at all these faces either on Zoom or in individual meetings. And I'm thinking, wow, here's all these extremely influential organizations and institutions in our business that are waiting on my decision. And it was quite the adjustment period where I didn't have to go through all those chains of command, if you will, to get something very simple um, done. And that was a really refreshing part of going into this endeavor, if you will, was being able to make those decisions. And some of them came pretty easy, but some of them, I really had to take a step back and reflect upon. And, I've learned that it's okay to say, hey, let me reflect on that. I'll get back to you tomorrow.
I'll follow up too and just say when you start a business, it's not just you and the business; it's your family as well. And you felt that from being a child of a family that owned a business, and also from the other side owning the business yourself. So how has that changed your family dynamic? How are you able to balance things? Because I know it's tough from our side.
I'll go back to a conversation I had with my wife. Every other year, we travel to go out to see my family on the East Coast, where my mom is originally from, and my grandmother's in her mid 90s now, so we try to get out there every other year. And this happened to be one of the years. This is December of 2023, and whenever we're in town, we have a few people over on Christmas Eve, and just more of an open house. And I remember as we were cleaning up, we sat down to just kind of take a deep breath from being on the stove all day and entertaining all day. And, I looked at my wife and she asked me, she said, well, what happens if all these people you need to say yes? About 15, 20 people at that point, all those yeses, what happens if they don't come through? And I just said, I haven't quite thought about that because this is plan A. And at this point, I'm just grateful. I'm really grateful to be in this position. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity, and was trying not so much to think about what was going to be next.
So, with someone with your success in all of your previous career roles, what was the trigger that made you take that risk and walk away from all of that to build something from scratch?
I would say seeing the changes of the industry over the last 10 years, and really in my opinion, becoming more transactional as opposed to focus on relationships, focus on taxpayer. I've seen a real focus on profitability and a consolidation of some of these smaller boutique firms, either into large national banks or private equity coming in. And, at that point, you're kind of being told how to do a job that these people may or may not have done in the past. So I think that, I saw a real opportunity to do what was right for the taxpayers in Colorado, and take an approach that's worked for decades throughout my career. And again, seeing things that could be improved upon and seeing things that weren't working so well and being able to change those all at once on benefit of providing best in class insight as well as service to local governments. I think that's what really was the catalyst for ripping off the Band-Aid.
So, let's take it back to the beginning when it was just you, an idea, a dream of starting this business. For let's say a finance director is listening to this, they're brand new to the job and they've never heard of CSLIP or Centennial Government Advisors. Explain what you built and why it exists.
Really serving in three different capacities: as a quasi portfolio manager and buying and selling small, medium, and large lots of agencies and treasuries for local governments, as well as overseeing now three of the four local government investment pools in Colorado, one that the board and I, helped to facilitate creating. I would just say it's imperative that you listen to the professionals out there. I would say that take every meeting that you can, and yeah, you might get some sales pitches here and there, but the institutional knowledge that you're going to get from these industry experts is invaluable. I think I've learned a lot about what it takes to be a county treasurer, what it takes to be a business manager of a special district or a CFO of a school district by sitting in these associations where all of these finance directors and county treasurers do attend. Learning more about what they do has helped me to educate them on some of the things that they should be focused on. And I think it really starts with people that are new to those roles, leaning on people like myself and my industry colleagues, leaning on Synergy to really take a step back and say, how much can I learn? What can I do? What can't I do? What are my peers doing? What are the recommendations of these individuals? And that's another shift that I've seen in the industry is I feel that more and more local governments tend to really take a lot longer to come out of their shell and seek that extra help from people like us. So that's probably the best advice I would give.
Ben, why do you think that is? Because I've noticed that as well, and I think I have my theories, but why do you think it takes someone so long to be able to look at more than just the default option that's out there?
Wow. I mean, if you figure out the answer to that question, let me know. Yeah, it'll be something that'll be implemented right away. But I think it's a fear of the unknown. I think there's a natural reluctance to change for us as humans. We do what we know, we do what others before us have done, and sometimes breaking out of that mold and kind of carving your own path is not easy. And Tracy asked a question earlier about what it takes to take that risk. I think it goes at all levels, not only at entrepreneurship, but on the local government side. Take the risk and learn what you can learn. Talk to the individuals. And, I always use an example out there for all those football fans that, the Cowboys were great in the 90s, but what have they done for you since? There's other teams out there that can, really add value, and that might be fun to watch, so give them
Speaking to a Cowboys fan here that suffered for a very long time.
I had to find a way to weave that in there today, Mike.
But that's just my NFC team. I do have an AFC team called the Broncos, so I know we can agree on that one.
Good answer.
I'll tell you my theory, and maybe you can tell me if it's on track or not. But I feel like when someone makes a change, whether it's the LGIP that they're using, or it's to even change the structure of the reserves, they're not just taking reputational risk. Sometimes they feel like they're taking career risk. Like if they get this wrong, it could end what they do and the path that they're on. At least that's how I understand it. And I, of course, take that super seriously. And I'm with them in the board meetings, and my job is to make sure that there is no career risk. That I'm making sure, and I think you have that same not burden, but that same responsibility as well. Would you say that's on track?
Yeah, that's a really good point. My initial thought as I was hearing your response there was a county treasurer that was there in La Plata County for, man, I think he was there for probably 4 or 5 terms, if not a little more, a little less. And his name was Ed Murray, and he was one of the ones that I was really paying attention to when I was learning this industry. Is he always said, Ben, I don't want to be the first county treasurer in the papers for taking losses of public funds. So we really have to take the extra due diligence here. And that really stuck with me over the years. And it's, in fact, one of the conversations that's really stuck out. And I think to your point, I've had many friends that are city managers where they're trying to, in their mind, do what's best for the community. But if you get a city council or a group of constituents that doesn't agree with that mindset, and Northwest Colorado reminds me a lot of that, is, they don't want to become a steamboat, but they also don't want to be stuck and not have that newer generation come back. And sometimes that takes that trailblazing, and that doesn't always go well. So they could lose their job by a very, what they think is an effective decision, allowable decision under CRS statutes. But at the end of the day, it's putting their neck on the line.
Yeah, one of the things we do is just when we're going in and meeting, it's a finance director, town manager for the first time, or a fire chief. The first thing we're trying to do is find out what the board wants to have happen with the reserve assets. And is that authority given in the structure of the reserves? Do they have documentation in place? And in many cases, we're not seeing that. And to me, that might be one of the biggest risks that we see out there, is not having any structure in place. That's the biggest risk for the finance director or whoever, or the CFO, whoever's in charge of managing those reserve assets.
Yeah, that comes, I think really to that point that you made earlier, governance, and putting very strict policies, whether they're home rule and have an existing charter, maybe create an ancillary policy for finance and budget, also investment policies, looking at, really these formal documents that can not only be a guide for the present finance director or county treasurer, but future, as well. And I think that's imperative to have within there. And it gives you a really nice safety net in case you do get a constituent that asks you, why aren't you investing in Bitcoin?
So, kind of going back to the creation of this company, how did you land and arrive on your company name, your logo? You do have a really amazing logo, by the way. Even your business card patches are super unique. Was that a long time? Was it fun? Was it stressful? How did the name come about?
Well, the first name that we started with was Centennial Government Advisors, because I had to get that going first. And looking around Colorado, I was trying to come up with something creative. Initially it was going to be Wapiti Advisors, or Wapiti, depending on how you want to pronounce that, which is a very um, distinguished name for elk, Rocky Mountain elk. But I started thinking, is there going to be cultural appropriation comments? Is there going to be, all these people taking a look at that as something that may not fit well? So then I started looking at Ridge Line and Drake and Eddy Line and Straight Line and all these different lines, if you will, because I do enjoy angling. But I figured, are we trying to create an outdoor company or a guiding service, or are we trying to create a advisory firm for local governments? And the more straight you hit the ball down the fairway, I'm not a golfer, but to use that term, I thought the better. And, Centennial, given that we are the Centennial state, I thought that fit well. And that was something where, okay, I've got Centennial. What do I look at for the others? And government advisors just kind of stuck out. And then we were off and running. And really, the Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, or CSLIP, name was picked by the board. I gave them, kind of 6, 7 creative options, and they had a few options in there as well. And everybody decided on CSLIP. And the logo, that I have to give all the credit to one of my great friends from college. He's a very creative person and works for a lot of companies you've heard of. And he offered to take a stab at the logo. And he actually did both the logo for CGA and for CSLIP. And the board absolutely loved the CSLIP logo. And we're off and running. And, the patch you mentioned, that has gone relatively viral. I was down in Pueblo the other day, and I went into an establishment, and there was our patch on the wall with a bunch of EMS and fire. So it was a huge compliment, and I did not give him that patch to put up. I don't know where it came from, but it was there.
Tracy, note to self, we might need to implement some sort of copycat patch design.
Yes.
I got a good design guy for you if you need one.
Perfection.
So tell us about the team that you're building.
Yeah. Being as imperative as we are for the oversight and stewardship of public funds, I think it's important to have industry professionals, but very experienced professionals. And I had the privilege of working alongside several small, medium, and large local governments around Colorado, as well as some very esteemed coworkers at some of my previous teams. And when we knew that CSLIP was really starting to grow, we wanted to have a lot of oversight, a lot of experience in the operations of the fund. So we brought over Barry Housden from my previous firm, and he's been an absolutely fantastic addition to the team as our chief operating officer. And then we had a local government express interest in what we were doing and looking to take the next step in their career and something that was going to be a challenge and outside of the box. And we were lucky to bring on Heather Morgan as our director of operations. And much like what we do for CSLIP, the boards are in complete control of these funds. I always tell people I have one client, and that's CSLIP. And if the board isn't happy, they can make changes. And one of the other funds in Colorado made a change at the administrator level. And this individual had been doing it for 28 years, and we competed against each other for 2 decades. And he approached me and said, "Hey, they decided to make a change. I've been watching what you guys are doing. I'd love to join the team." So, really a lot of these individuals stuck out throughout my career. And, that's what we're looking for moving forward, is somebody that really is willing to put their heart in to what we do and understand what we do at a very high level. And that's, how we focus on growing. So it's more responsible additions to the team as opposed to just hiring a bunch of people and seeing who fits.
Absolutely. And so you went from more of an individual role at your previous, now competitors, if you will. But what is the biggest pet peeve about leadership that you have?
I would say a leader that doesn't listen to the front lines, if you will, the people that are out there doing the very difficult tasks and the disciplined approach every single day, and completely understanding what they're doing and thinking that they have it figured out. I think ignorant leadership is probably one of the worst out there, and leading by authority. Some of the best baseball coaches I had growing up and mentors I had were lead by committee, lead by example. And I think really looking at some of the less than ideal leaders I've seen throughout my career, I focused on being the exact opposite of them.
Leadership. So leadership has shifted a little bit for you, being a leader inside of somebody else's business and being your own leader. The buck stops with you, just as one of our presidents said at one point. And so I feel that as well. Tell us about a time you're successful now. So we can look back on the last couple of years, 3 years, and say, hey, here's a time I got my teeth kicked in. And we ask when we interview people about this as well, whether it's on a podcast or somebody's going to be part of our team, because we want to know somebody's got grit. We want to know they've been through it and they can get through it later with us. And so tell us about a time early on, middle of the way, that something happened and you just had to lead your way through it and grit your teeth.
Wow, great question. There's been so many. What do I narrow it down to? I think where I proverbially got my teeth kicked in the beginning was not thinking 2 steps ahead. Okay, if this happens, then what's next, and what's next after that? So really trying to see the forest through the trees and past all the storm clouds that are in front of you, and trying to navigate that storm, knowing that 1, you're going to get through it, but 2, you got to really lean on people. I had a fantastic amount of resources around me when we were putting this together, from the team at State Street to the team at our custodian bank, our board. I think that really focusing on listening to them and really hearing what their perspectives are helped guide me through some of those rough days. And, I would say another, extreme challenge that I had to navigate was finding that balance between the amount of time that I'm spending at work, but also the time that I need to be spending with my parents that, God bless, are still both alive, and my wife and daughter and my friends. Setting up that order of priorities of what's most important in your life and not losing track of that is probably where I got my teeth kicked in the most, is being able to take a step back and really focus. Okay, it's been a while since I've been over to see my dad or my mom, or it's been a while since I've taken my daughter to the park. So I think that was a huge adjustment for me.
Kind of partnering on that, starting a business is hard enough when everything lines up correct. And there can at times be a little bit of doubt. There's imposter syndrome, there's head trash that can creep in. What does that internal battle look like for you, and how do you manage that?
Great question. You can kind of feel it when it's coming, right? You can feel when you're starting to wonder if the direction you're heading in is the right way. And I had a great mentor. I still have him. That's been around and watched me grow throughout my career. And when I talked to this individual about doing this, he said, "You're going to have those doubt days, and the best advice I can give you is just push through 'em." A lot of the friends that I have out there that really encourage me to do this, and really starting with my wife, she said, "Look, you're just gonna have to push through those days. I'll do what I can to help you, but just know that a lot of this is going to have to be on you." And through some of those days, you just kind of take a step back and say, "Okay, how much of a crisis actually is this?" Because the general counsel of the fund and I used to joke, it went from crisis of the day to crisis of the week to crisis of the month, and we still have the crisis of the month, but they're starting to be fewer and further between, and just really focusing on, hey, what's the best decision that you can make now without being able to predict the future, and pushing through that and being able to adapt along the way. I think is absolutely critical.
So Ben, at Synergy, we position ourselves as Colorado's governance first reserve management firm. And we just believe deeply that governance is where everything should start when we start talking with somebody. And we educate the board, you educate the board as well. It's also educating staff. Sometimes they're newer and they really need that education. Sometimes they just need support. Sometimes they're just overworked and they're understaffed, and we can come in and just kind of be an extra team to have them direct and do their bidding. Um, how much room, when you look at governance across all of the many contacts you've had across the state, how much room is there for governance to really grow and improve?
I think the sky's the limit, and I really think that we need more, especially in some of the more rural communities, whether it's Eastern Plains or Central Mountains or Western Slope. I think that that's where a lot of that focus needs to be, and establishing those really great policies. But also, I mean, you have a bunch of volunteers, like a fire district board, outside of Uray, Colorado. A lot of these people are volunteers, and they're either ranchers or business people, or have their own profession and their own focus, every single day, that, they get a board packet twice a month or once a month or once a quarter, and sometimes, and really providing that oversight to the individuals that have to stand in front of these boards, and educating these boards on why it's important, I think is critical. Here on the Front Range, I've also seen, some governance that can be improved, but I think that, outside of the Denver area is where we really need to increase that. And I think that it could be dramatically increased statewide.
Just two more questions for you before we wrap this up. But what do you want a finance director or board member listening to this episode to do differently or take away after they've listened to this?
Be open-minded. Really take a step back and look at what you're doing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on leveraging the professionals, whether it's your auditor, whether it's your bond attorney, it's your investment advisor, it's your municipal advisor, it is your cash experts like us, really asking them questions, being open to, new ideas, and being open to new suggestions of best language in your policies. Really, I used to say all the time when I was on one of my previous teams, being relatively complacent at the wheel will get you to the destination, but you have to constantly have your head on a swivel, especially here in Colorado, and being on the lookout for issues that can be coming down the road. Leverage your state employees, your elected officials, and leverage your information sources like the University of Colorado. Really educate yourself on what the best practice is out there. And I think that starts with talking to your peers, and start talk to individuals like ourselves, and just get our thoughts.
One thing I'll say too is that lack of having an open mind, lack of looking at other options is a conscious decision to stay with the current default option. And it's one that does have to be defended at some point. Just staying where you are doesn't necessarily make it defensible down the road.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is that football team I referenced earlier. absolutely outstanding in the mid 90s. And then, they still get referred to as America's team, but I struggle to remember the last time they beat Little D, which is Denver, and that had to be late 70s. Again, I use that analogy in jest because it's a great analogy to look at for local governments and just say, hey, is who I'm working with or the approach that I'm taking. Just because it's been great for 20 years, is it great for the next 20 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So, last question. We are recording this at a specific moment in time. You're 2 years into building something that we truly believe is going to matter and make a difference. If your future self could come back and listen to this episode 10 years from now, what is the one thing you'd want to hear yourself say? What do you want to remember about, where you were, what you were doing, what you believed when you were right in the middle, in the thick of it?
I'd say first thing would be patience. Great things always take longer than expected. Discipline after that, stay the course. Even if it's, you start to get towards shore a little bit, find a way to get back in the center of the channel. Gratefulness. Be great. Continue to be grateful. And I think a word that is dramatically overlooked these days is humble. Stay humble. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you're going. Don't forget why you're doing it. But then I'd also say appreciation for the ones that supported me from day one, but also the ones that didn't support me, to look at them and still be able to smile and be friendly.
I love everything about that. Well, Ben, this is exactly the conversation that we were hoping to have. We truly appreciate all of your knowledge, all of your answers to our questions. How can we let anyone who listens to this connect with you? Where do they find CSLIP? How do they get in touch with Centennial Government Advisors?
Oh, I appreciate that. Our team of 70 years combined experience is in the Denver office. We're local. We're here. The easiest way to get a hold of me or anybody on the team and see what we're doing and see where we're different is to check out the CSLIP website, cslip.org. And if you do a Google search for Centennial State Liquid Investment Pool, it'll be right there with that logo that you mentioned. And I appreciate the opportunity to mention who we are.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again so much, Ben.
Thanks, Tracy and Michael. And most importantly, thank you for listening to the Untapped Synergy podcast. We ask you to share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review because this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you for listening. And for Tracy and Michael, I'm RJ Malik, and we'll see you at the next Untapped Synergy podcast. Thanks for listening to Untapped Synergy. For more episodes, insights, and tools to help you lead with confidence, be sure to follow the show and visit us at synergy-colorado.com. For personalized guidance or to start a conversation, give us a call at 970-837-3088. Keep leading boldly. We're here to support your next step. The information presented in this podcast is the opinion of Synergy Capital and does not reflect the view of any other person or entity. The information provided is believed to be from reliable sources, but no liability is accepted for any inaccuracies. This is for information purposes and should not be construed as an investment recommendation. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. You should consult your tax and/or legal advisors before implementing any transactions and/or strategies concerning your finances. Synergy Capital is an investment advisor registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission.